This story was sent to me by Sarah Martinez via email. I thought I was going to die in that parking garage. The footsteps behind me were getting closer, and I could hear him breathing heavily as he tried to match my pace. But let me back up and tell you how this all started. I was working late at my accounting firm downtown Chicago, near the Look District. It was February, so by 6 p.m., it was already pitch black outside. Our office building had this old parking garage attached to it, the kind with dim fluorescent lights that flickered constantly and cast weird shadows everywhere. Most of my coworkers had left hours ago, but I was stuck finishing up some tax documents that were due the next morning. When I finally packed up around 9:30, the building felt completely empty. The security guard usually did his rounds on the lower floors, but up on the 15th floor where our office was, it felt like I was the only person left in the entire building. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator, my heels clicking against the marble floor in a way that seemed way too loud in the silence. The parking garage was connected to the building through a sky bridge on the 8th floor. As soon as I stepped off the elevator into the garage, I knew something felt off. The usual hum of the ventilation system seemed louder somehow, and there were way fewer cars than normal. Mine was parked on the far end, near the exterior wall, where the monthly parking was cheaper. I started walking toward it, my keys already in my hand. That's when I heard the first footstep behind me. Just one, like someone had been standing still and then decided to move. I turned around but didn't see anyone. The garage was full of concrete pillars and parked cars, so there were plenty of places someone could hide. I told myself I was being paranoid and kept walking, but I started walking faster. Then I heard it again. Definitely footsteps this time, and they were trying to match my rhythm. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was still about 50 feet from my car, and the footsteps were getting closer. I made a split-second decision and ducked behind a parked SUV, crouching down between two cars. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps stopped too, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Heavy breathing, like someone was out of breath from walking fast, and it was close, maybe 10 feet away from where I was hiding. I peeked around the edge of the SUV and saw a man standing near one of the concrete pillars. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie, and he was scanning the area like he was looking for something, or someone. He had something in his hand that looked like a phone, but he was holding it weird, like he was recording. I realized I was trapped. My car was still 30 feet away, and he was between me and the exit. I had my phone, but I knew it would take at least 10 minutes for security or police to get up to the 8th floor of the parking garage. I needed to get out of there right away. The man started moving again, walking slowly between the cars like he was hunting. I could hear him checking behind vehicles, getting closer to where I was hiding. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my keys without them jingling. Then I remembered something my dad had taught me years ago. If you're ever in danger in a parking garage, set off your car alarm. The noise will draw attention and might scare off whoever is following you. I pressed the panic button on my key fob, and immediately my car started honking and flashing its lights. The sound echoed through the garage like it was amplified. The man jumped back, clearly surprised, and I saw him look around frantically. I used that moment to run. I sprinted toward my car, not caring about the noise my heels were making on the concrete. Behind me, I could hear him running too. His footsteps were heavier than mine, but I had a head start. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking. The door seemed to take forever to unlock, and I could hear him getting closer. I threw myself into the driver's seat and immediately locked all the doors. Through my rear window, I could see him standing about 20 feet away, just watching me. He didn't try to approach the car, but he didn't leave either. He just stood there, and in the flashing light from my car alarm, I could see he was smiling. I started the engine and backed out as fast as I could. As I drove toward the exit, I kept checking my mirrors, but he didn't follow. He just stood there in the garage, watching me. I called building security as soon as I got to street level, but when they checked the garage 15 minutes later, he was gone. The security footage from that night was mysteriously corrupted. The cameras on the 8th floor had been working fine all week, but somehow the recording from that evening was just static. Building management said it was probably a technical glitch, but I knew better. I never parked in that garage again. I found a different lot 3 blocks away, even though it cost more. Because sometimes the extra money you spend on feeling safe is worth every penny. And sometimes trusting your instincts about danger is the only thing that keeps you alive. I found this on a Reddit thread by user Chicago Night Shift. The elevator doors opened on the wrong floor, and that's when I saw the man with the camera pointed directly at me. He wasn't supposed to be there. Nobody was supposed to be on the 14th floor after midnight. But let me back up and explain how I ended up in that situation in the first place. I worked as a night janitor for a big office complex in downtown Chicago, right off Michigan Avenue. The building housed about 20 different companies, mostly law firms and financial advisors, the kind of places that generated a lot of trash and needed deep cleaning after business hours. I'd been doing this job for about 8 months, and I'd developed a pretty solid routine. My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. The building was supposed to be completely empty except for security guards on the ground floor. I had a master key that gave me access to every floor, and I would work my way up from the 2nd floor to the 20th, cleaning offices, emptying trash cans, and vacuuming carpets while most of the city slept. The money was decent, and I liked the solitude. No office politics, no demanding bosses looking over my shoulder, just me and my cleaning supplies working through empty hallways. The building had good lighting and decent security, so I felt safe even working alone at night. On this particular evening in late March, I was running a little behind schedule. I'd started on the 3rd floor instead of the 2nd because there had been some kind of event in one of the law offices, and the place was trashed. Food everywhere, spilled drinks on the carpet, the works. It took me an extra hour just to get that floor back to normal. By 2 a.m., I was finally ready to move up to the 14th floor. I loaded my cart into the service elevator and pressed the button. The elevator in this building was old and slow, but reliable. I knew it would take about 30 seconds to reach the 14th floor, so I was checking my phone when the doors opened. But instead of opening onto the 14th floor, the doors opened onto what looked like the 12th floor. I knew every floor in this building by heart, and this was definitely the wrong layout. More importantly, there was a man standing about 10 feet away from the elevator, and he was pointing a camera directly at me. He wasn't supposed to be there. Nobody was supposed to be on the 14th floor after midnight. But let me back up and explain how I ended up in that situation in the first place. I worked as a night janitor for a big office complex in downtown Chicago, right off Michigan Avenue. The building housed about 20 different companies, mostly law firms and financial advisors, the kind of places that generated a lot of trash and needed deep cleaning after business hours. I'd been doing this job for about 8 months, and I developed a pretty solid routine. My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. The building was supposed to be completely empty except for security guards on the ground floor. I had a master key that gave me access to every floor, and I would work my way up from the 2nd floor to the 20th, cleaning offices, emptying trash cans, and vacuuming carpets while most of the city slept. The money was decent, and I liked the solitude. No office politics, no demanding bosses looking over my shoulder, just me and my cleaning supplies working through empty hallways. The building had good lighting and decent security, so I felt safe even working alone at night. On this particular evening in late March, I was running a little behind schedule. I'd started on the 3rd floor instead of the 2nd because there had been some kind of event in one of the law offices, and the place was trashed, food everywhere, spilled drinks on the carpet, the works. It took me an extra hour just to get that floor back to normal. By 2 a.m., I was finally ready to move up to the 14th floor. I loaded my cart into the service elevator and pressed the button. The elevator in this building was old and slow, but reliable. I knew it would take about 30 seconds to reach the 14th floor, so I was checking my phone when the doors opened. But instead of opening onto the 14th floor, the doors opened onto what looked like the 12th floor. I knew every floor in this building by heart, and this was definitely the wrong layout. More importantly, there was a man standing about 10 feet away from the elevator, and he was pointing a camera directly at me. He was middle-aged, maybe 50, wearing a business suit like he belonged there, but his presence made no sense. The building was supposed to be empty, and even if someone was working late, why would they be filming the service elevator? He didn't say anything when he saw me, just kept that camera pointed in my direction. I quickly pressed the button to close the elevator doors, but they seemed to be moving slower than usual. The man started walking toward me, still holding the camera up. I could see the red recording light was on. My heart started racing because this whole situation felt completely wrong. The doors finally closed, and I immediately pressed the button for the ground floor. But instead of going down, the elevator started going up. I pressed the ground floor button again, but nothing happened. The elevator kept climbing. It stopped on the 16th floor. When the doors opened, there was another man waiting. This one was younger, maybe in his 30s, and he was also holding a camera. He stepped into the elevator before I could react, and suddenly I was trapped in a small space with a stranger who was filming me without permission. He didn't speak either, just held the camera up and kept recording. I could see my own reflection in the lens, and I looked terrified, because I was. I had no idea what these people wanted or why they were in the building, but every instinct I had was screaming that I was in serious danger. I tried to press the alarm button in the elevator, but the man grabbed. His grip was firm, but not painful, like he was trying to restrain me without hurting me. That almost made it worse because it meant he was thinking clearly and planning whatever this was. The elevator started moving again, but this time it went down, all the way down to the basement, which was a floor I'd never been to before. I didn't even know the building had a basement level that was accessible by elevator. When the doors opened, I could see it was some kind of storage area with concrete walls and dim lighting. There were 3 more people waiting down there, 2 men and 1 woman, all holding cameras or phones, all pointing them at me. They formed a semicircle around the elevator entrance, and I realized they had been planning this. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random. The woman stepped forward and finally spoke. She said they weren't going to hurt me, they just needed some footage for a project they were working on. She said they had been watching me work for weeks and knew my schedule, knew I would be alone in the building. That's when I understood how much trouble I was in. These weren't random strangers who had somehow gotten into the building. They had been planning this for weeks. They knew my routine, my schedule, my patterns. They had been stalking me without me even knowing it. I told them I was going to scream for security, but the woman just smiled and said the security guards were taking their break and wouldn't hear me from the basement. She said they had timed everything perfectly, and all they needed was about 10 minutes of footage. But 10 minutes felt like an eternity when you're trapped in a basement with 5 strangers who have been watching you without your knowledge. I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of fighting or trying to run, I started talking. I asked them about their project, acted interested, tried to build some kind of human connection. It worked. They started explaining that they were film students working on some kind of documentary about night shift workers in Chicago. They said they had tried to contact me through my employer but hadn't gotten permission, so they decided to approach me directly. Even if that story was true, which I doubted, their methods were completely inappropriate and probably illegal. But I played along, nodded like I understood, and slowly convinced them to let me go. I promised to think about participating in their project if they contacted me through proper channels. They finally agreed to let me take the elevator back to the ground floor. As soon as the doors opened, I went straight to the security desk. But when I explained what had happened, the security guard said he hadn't seen anyone enter or leave the building all night. The sign-in log showed only my name. The basement level I had been taken to. This was shared with me on Instagram by Marcus Thompson. I knew something was wrong when I heard my own voice coming from the apartment next door. But it wasn't just similar to my voice, it was exactly my voice, saying words I had never spoken. Let me explain how I discovered my neighbor had been recording me for months without my knowledge. I lived in a converted warehouse building in Chicago's West Loop, the kind of trendy loft space that attracted young professionals who wanted to live downtown but couldn't afford the really expensive neighborhoods. My unit was on the 4th floor, and the walls were thin enough that you could hear conversations from the adjacent apartments if people were talking loudly. I'd been living there for about 2 years and had a pretty good relationship with most of my neighbors. The building had about 40 units, and most of the residents were in their 20s and 30s, working in tech or finance. It felt like a safe, modern building with good security and a decent management company. The unit next to mine had been empty for about 6 months after the previous tenant moved out. Then, in January, a new guy moved in. I never officially met him, but I'd see him occasionally in the hallway or lobby. He seemed normal enough, maybe mid-30s, always dressed professionally like he worked in an office somewhere downtown. The first thing I noticed was that he kept really strange hours. I would hear him moving around at all hours of the night, sometimes as late as 3 or 4 a.m. Not loud enough to really bother me, just the usual sounds of someone walking around their apartment, opening and closing doors, that kind of thing. But over time, I started noticing patterns that didn't quite make sense. Like he seemed to be most active when I was active. If I got up early to work out before going to my job, I would hear him moving around too. If I stayed up late watching Netflix, I could hear him doing things in his apartment as well. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Plenty of people have irregular schedules, especially in a building full of young professionals who might work non-traditional hours. But then I started noticing he was playing music that was eerily similar to what I listened to. Not the same songs, but the same genre, the same artists, like he had somehow figured out my taste in music. The thing that really got my attention was when I heard him talking on the phone. His apartment was laid out exactly like mine, so his living room shared a wall with my bedroom. If he was on a phone call in his living room and talking loudly, I could hear it pretty clearly through the wall. One night in March, I was lying in bed around 11 p.m. when I heard him talking to someone. At first, it just sounded like a normal conversation, but then I started actually listening to what he was saying, and I realized he was talking about my life. He was describing my work schedule, my routine, even mentioning specific details about my job that I had never discussed with anyone in the building. I thought maybe he had somehow overheard me talking on my own phone calls, and he was just repeating information he had picked up. But then he started talking about things I had never said out loud to anyone. Private thoughts, things I had only written in my journal or thought about silently. That's when I heard my own voice, clear as day, coming from his apartment. It was me talking about a conversation I'd had with my sister the week before. But the weird thing was, that conversation had taken place in my apartment, and I was sure I had been alone. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall. I could hear what sounded like a recording of me talking to my sister about our mom's birthday plans. Every word was exactly what I had said, in my exact voice, but I had no memory of that conversation being recorded. My heart started pounding because I realized what this meant. Somehow, my neighbor had been recording my private conversations inside my own apartment. But how was that possible? I had never given him access to my place, never left my door unlocked, never noticed any recording equipment. I spent the next few hours lying awake, trying to figure out how he could have been recording me. The building was old, converted from a warehouse, and the walls were thick brick. It would be almost impossible to get clear audio recordings through the walls unless he had some kind of professional equipment. The next morning, I decided to do some investigating. I called in sick to work and spent the day carefully examining every inch of my apartment. I was looking for hidden microphones, cameras, anything that might explain how he was getting such clear recordings of my private conversations. I found the first device hidden inside my smoke detector. It was tiny, about the size of a coin, and it was definitely not part of the original smoke detector hardware. When I found the second one hidden in my air conditioning vent, I knew this wasn't paranoia. Someone had systematically bugged my apartment. I called the police, but they told me I would need more evidence before they could get involved. They suggested I document everything, maybe try to record him playing back my conversations. So I set up my own recording device near the shared wall and waited. That night, around the same time as before, I heard him start playing recordings again. This time, it was a conversation I'd had with my best friend about a dating situation I was dealing with. Personal, intimate details that I had never shared with anyone. But as I listened, I realized something even more disturbing. He wasn't just playing back my conversations, he was editing them, cutting and pasting pieces together to create new conversations that had never actually happened. I recorded about 20 minutes of this before I heard him leave his apartment. I knew this was my chance to get more evidence, so I went out into the hallway and listened at his door. I could hear equipment running inside, like computers or recording devices. When I went back to my apartment and played back my recording, I had clear evidence of him playing recordings of my voice. I took this to the police the next morning, and they finally agreed to investigate. It turned out my neighbor wasn't actually my neighbor. He had somehow gotten access to the empty apartment and had been living there illegally for months. Building management had no record of him as a tenant, and the real owner of that unit lived in California and had no idea someone was squatting there. When police searched the apartment, they found hundreds of hours of recordings of me and several other residents in the building. He had somehow managed to install listening devices in multiple apartments and had been collecting recordings for what looked like months. They also found evidence that he was selling these recordings online to people who were interested in eavesdropping on strangers' private lives. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts against evil surveillance, breaking and entering, and identity theft. I had to move out of that building because I never felt safe there again, knowing that someone had been listening to my most private moments for months without my knowledge. The scariest part wasn't just that he had been recording me, but that he had been using my own voice to create conversations that never happened. He had collected enough recordings that he could essentially make me say anything he wanted, and I would never have known unless I had accidentally overheard him playing them back.